Greetings from the FBU as we try to build the campaign in all our unions, all our communities against the austerity agenda that is attacking our people. And just to echo some of the points about the sun used to be bought on fire stations when I was a young firefighter, and one of the turning points in that was when we went on strike in 2002 and we were labelled as stooges of Saddam by the paper. And the result of that is that in many fire stations still, if somebody brings a copy of the Sun, somebody sets it on fire. So that's how rank and file firefighters do it. And I just absolutely endorse the comments about the welcoming the outcome of the examination of what happened at Hillsborough. And very pleased, I'm sure, as we all are to see today, that there is now a referral for an examination into what happened at Orgreave. Where you've gone from the biggest cover-up in history to the biggest frame-up in history of miners fighting to defend their jobs and communities in 1984-85. And we should not forget that behind that, and behind those attacks of the state, was also a political attack of Thatcher, who described workers fighting for their jobs as the enemy within. Well, what they did is declare war on our people, and that war is now reinvigorated by the coalition government. And I'll just try and address some of the things that we've been looking at in the FBU, because it is really the challenge of our lives. I just want to throw out some ideas that I think we need to be debating. That we will need to organise in our workplaces as never before. Trade unions have been under 25, 30 years of attack, and we're going to have to rebuild those unions in the workplace. We need to, if we're going to build and fight back, then we're going to need to organise in the workplace. We need to make sure that every struggle that takes place, we all mobilise to support people, whether they're on strike, whether they're fighting to defend a hospital or stop a school closing or whatever. We need to ensure that genuine democratic anti-cuts alliances and organisations are built in every single town and city, and that we then organise those nationally. We're going to have an international aspect to this fight. What is happening to us is exactly the same as what is happening to workers in Portugal, Spain, and of course in Greece. And we need to challenge the ideas that lie behind austerity, because it's unfortunate, isn't it, when the whole political establishment, from the Tory Lib Dem coalition, unfortunately to include the leadership of the Labour Party, say that cuts, pay freezes and attacks on our pensions are inevitable and unavoidable, and that Labour will carry on with them if they are re-elected. We need to have a real debate in our movement about the alternatives to austerity. Because if you look at some of the figures, the Office for National Statistics just a couple of weeks ago reported that average net national income per head has fallen by 13.2% over the past 4 years, the worst fall in living standards of any post-war recession. And yet you look at what is happening at the top, quite the reverse. So actually for the majority, in fact, the lower down the pecking order you are, the more your living standards are being attacked and are being hit. Because Income Data Services, just the same week, remarkably, reported that boardroom pay in Britain had risen by 27% in a single year. And they tell us there's no money for public services, no money for pay rises for public sector workers. In reality, the money, the resources are there. And you listen to what the political establishment is saying. Vince Cable, supposedly the social democratic wing of the Lib Dems, says that we should, he was going to, 2 years ago, going to launch an investigation into boardroom pay. Well, what the hell has happened with his investigation? It's obviously been a complete failure when we get those figures from 2 years ago. Ed Miliband talks about, well, what we should do is we should put a worker on the remuneration committee of these big companies. Does anyone seriously think they're going to take a blind bit of notice of one worker sitting on a remuneration committee when they're discussing whether it should be £3.5 million a year or £4 million a year? They don't give a damn what workers think unless we start to get organised and fight back. That is what will make them sit up and take notice. And we've begun to look more widely in our union. We took a motion to the TUC this year. We're very pleased. For the first time in a trade union congress's history, we passed a motion calling for public ownership of the banks. because across the world, everybody knows the role that the banks played in sparking this crisis that we're now having to pay for. And yet they all want to fiddle around with it. They want to separate investment banking from retail banking, regulation and so on. Every single regulation system that has ever been designed has been bypassed by the banks and by big business. And we want to place on the agenda that actually what we need to do is put on the agenda public ownership of our banks, and I would say public ownership more widely. Look at what's happening to our privatised energy utilities. We're being ripped off. The so-called market does not deliver value for workers, does not deliver value for consumers either. We should also demand that gas, energy, rail are all brought back into public ownership as well. I'll just finish on this. I think we need to have some very fundamental debates in our movement about what sort of world we live in. Because if they are saying that we can't afford pay rises, if they are saying that we can't afford hospitals, that we have to close care homes for our elderly, what they're saying is that their system can't afford those things. And I have to say that if their system can't afford those things, perhaps we need to start discussing a different system that can do so. For me, that means putting on the agenda very clearly that if you can't give us decent security and living standards, then we want a different form of society. For my union and our rule book, that means a socialist society. I think the left has to put that on the agenda as part of this battle against the cuts. Thank you very much.